Hello, my name is Valley. I was known as Mel Fairs on TikTok. There I gained a moderate following as a TikTok atheist. And Braxton Hunter, Trinity Radio, responded to me, one of my one of my more popular videos on there, and I wanted to take the time and respond, and if any, just to see if anyone would care. And if no one cares, then it'll just be a fun little intellectual exercise, won't it?
Okay, I like this guy. I like that he's trying to be
He
respectful, and he
likes
says
me.
so. And he also says toward the end that he thinks there are some, quote, solid arguments for God. So, with that in mind,
So in the beginning of my video, I said, these are the top 5 reasons I'm not a Christian, respectfully. Um, the reason I did that is for a million reasons, but the main one is to kind of subvert expectation. Um, I know, and everyone watching this knows, that the reputation of online atheists is not very good. It's that of rude, brash, arrogant people who might not necessarily care about the argument more than like the view. So right off the bat, I kind of want to subvert expectation and create um, interest, I guess.
let's think about what he's just said.
Here are my top 5 reasons I'm not a Christian, respectfully. Number 1 is what's known as the probabilistic problem of evil. It's just the idea we look out.
Don't you guys hate that we have to do like the incoming response thing? It's what I hate about TikTok. Just people, our our attention spans have become ridiculous.
Upon the world, we see unimaginable suffering. How many people have starved since the beginning of this video? Is it possible an all-loving God exists? Yeah, it just doesn't seem likely given so much suffering in the world.
So he's mentioned the probabilistic arguments from evil. Now that is the better family of arguments, because a logical argument from evil seeks to show that it's just that there's some incoherence between a God so defined with the omnis and everything, that's so defined that God exists and the evil that we see exists. So this is like the Epicurean paradox. But that is making a stronger claim, but is easier to respond to, because all you have to do is give any possible explanation for why God might allow evil and have some greater good reason for doing so. That's all you may don't even have to know if that's the right answer. Just so long as there is such an answer that might be the case, it takes the teeth out of the argument of saying it must be the case that if God exists, you won't find this evil. All right. And so God does not exist. The probabilistic or evidential arguments from evil aren't saying that. This is why he says, well, I'm not saying it's impossible. And it's because this is making the softer claim, but this is the more difficult family of arguments from evil to deal with, because it's not saying it's impossible that God exists, so defined. It's just saying that, yeah, your theodicies and the answers that you give, the defenses, those are all fine, but it just, it doesn't, either it doesn't explain well certain gratuitous evils that seem to have no greater good purpose. There seem to be enough things like that. If you look at someone like William Rowe on this, there seem to be enough things like that that at least it lowers the probability dramatically that such a God exists. Now, the reason I mentioned that he said toward the end that there are some, quote, solid arguments for God is that if we have other good reasons that show for, to a high degree of confidence that God exists, then the evidential argument, which doesn't demonstrate God's non-existence, but just makes it less probable, well, now the probability is all out of whack, because we have this other thing over here that shows that God.
Okay, so this is an example of why um, it's tough on these online videos that you need to be super precise with your language. So when I say I think there are quote unquote good arguments for God, I don't mean the God in the sense of Christianity. I mean the sense of a deistic, non-personal, um, you know, strike the cue ball and leave everything else up to whatever. Maybe there's a mind, maybe some type of argument like this. Not, oh well, there's a good. I don't believe that there's any good argument for the type of God that Christians propose. So
God does exist. That's why I like to talk about the theistic arguments in the resurrection case, in addition to discussing evidential arguments from evil, or arguments from evil in general, but specific.
And when you think of um, the problem of evil, it's as simple as you say there's an all-loving, all-powerful God who wants to have a relationship with me. I look around and I see people who are willing to have that relationship, people who call out to God all the time and hear no response. It's as simple as that.
Specifically with the evidential arguments. So that's what I would do with that. And since he does think there are solid arguments, well, then I do think that that changes the probability over here, because the evidential argument from evil is something you can discuss on its own. But in criticism of that argument, not only are we going to talk about possible reasons God might have for allowing these evils, but we're also going to bring in these theistic arguments that we think also counterbalance and actually outweigh the evidence that comes to us from the evidential arguments or probabilistic arguments. Let's see what else he has to say.
Number 2 is what's known as divine hiddenness. It's the idea that there are people out there that would believe in God if it was just revealed to them. And there are people today in Africa, the Middle East, that have never even heard of Jesus. They've never heard the gospel even one time. And if a relationship with God is the ultimate good, then it just seems ridiculous that he wouldn't reveal himself to these people.
Now, on this one, what I like is he didn't go the way that you might have actually thought he did go, which is to say, well, these people that are in, that are in what missionaries call the 1040 window, these places where they haven't heard the gospel yet. Okay. You might have thought he was saying, well, look, those people are going to die and go to hell because they never heard the gospel. Then we would respond to that with answers for, how does God judge people who've never heard the gospel, the fate of the unevangelized, as it's sometimes put. And we've talked about that many times, and maybe we'll come back to that at some point. But he doesn't go there. Instead, what he just does is a softer and I think better claim from his perspective is, Jesus, knowing the truth about Jesus, for whatever reason, that's a good thing. That is a really good thing. And it seems unfair or doesn't seem like it's what God would do if many, many people never encounter that, whether that's because they don't go to hell or just because they don't get to know about the kingdom, right? It could be something like that. What I would want to say about this is, since we're not talking about the fate of the unevangelized, since that wasn't brought in, we can just go with the strict divine hiddenness response, set of responses, which is to say, okay, you're talking about a non-resistant non-believer. And as has been said before, some people find this insulting. I'm just saying it's true that we have psychologists in this world because we don't always entirely understand our own psychology. And so it may be that one thinks that they are completely non-resistant, but all of us have biases. And it's better to understand that we have all biases and try to understand those. Now, I don't know you, whoever you are, personally.
So this kind of gets away from. I don't think you can defend this claim because it. I think it eliminates any type of free will argument. Um, just to give an example, let's imagine I thought this whole time that I was non-resistant and I really wanted to have a relationship with God and I really put myself out there and I just don't actually believe it. So I die, and on Judgment Day, God comes and he says, yeah, you really thought that. You really thought that, Valley, but what you didn't understand was your mother, when you were about 5 years old, she used to punish you. And whenever she would punish you, she kind of made a connection with the Bible, and that caused you to have a negative association with Christianity. And as a result, later in life, those connections were harder for you. So sorry, that's why you weren't a Christian, and you don't get to go to heaven now. This seems this seems something that you don't actually believe in, and it seems like I don't know how you could ever defend this, and these are all the problems with free will that I think your type of Christianity has. I just don't. I don't see how that is possible in your worldview.
In the red hat or any particular person watching. And so let's say it was true about you that you really are a completely non-resistant non-believer. You would believe, you want to believe if the evidence was just given to you. Well, the way that my friend Jonathan McClatchy deals with this is to say, yeah, and at some point in your life, that should be the case, and you will either, evidence that is reasonable to convince you is there, and you either accept or reject. And you might say, honestly, that has not happened to me, and you might be right, or you might be wrong. But if you're right, then it's coming. It could be coming at some point down the line. At which case, you're in no position now to say that it's not ever coming. Okay, that's one thing. Another thing to say about this is what I said in my debate with Matt.
Okay, so this could be true. This is possible. Okay, but isn't this like doesn't this stink? Doesn't this smell of cognitive dissonance? Isn't this completely unsatisfying for what you claim this God is capable of? I don't know. Yeah, sure. And I think this is where philosophy gets a bad rap because sure, it's possible, but is it likely? Is it likely that a God that I pray to every day, he will wait till I'm 95 years old to finally reveal himself? I guess it's likely, or I guess it's possible, but is it likely? It doesn't seem like it. It seems like this is just a coping mechanism for you to explain um why I am the way that I am, why people don't believe the way that you believe.
Dillahunty, which is to say that whether it has been realized by a particular person or not, I think that the evidence that it is reasonable to believe on the basis of this evidence is there already. I think every physical object and every concept in the universe can be used as a part of an incredible argument for God's existence. But at the very least, we have the coming into being of the universe itself and arguments like contingency arguments, the Kalam argument, design arguments, ontological arguments, moral arguments. All of these are, I think, if you just went with the design argument, which many atheists think is pretty good, I think there is reason to believe at least that there's a God. And as far as the resurrection, we could talk about a case for the resurrection, the truth of Christianity. So all of that evidence, I think, is there. But it may be that you just haven't been yet, sufficiently convinced of that, and maybe that's coming at some point.
So here's what I keep hearing in your language. I think, I think, I think, I think. I don't know why. I don't know why someone would trust their own intuitions on something like this. Um, when the experts widely disagree. The experts on um, the scholars of the Bible, they widely disagree on what the Bible means, how it should be translated, when it was written, how it was written. When it comes to God, the experts in the field disagree that there is a God. Um, just look around the world. Everyone disagrees on why there's a God. I don't know why we ought to trust your intuitions on. I think that you can use all these different things to make a great solid case for the existence of God. Um, sure, that's something that you think, but I don't know why we would ever be so confident in saying that, especially given the broad range of disagreement. Um, I just think it's more rational to say, wow, if no one fucking agrees on this, um, I don't know why I would be so confident.
These are some thoughts. Another thing that William Lane Craig often
Sorry,
says
just
in
making
response to
sure it's
this is
still
to say,
working.
God gives us evidence that is sufficient, according to us. This is what we think. God gives sufficient evidence. If he's given enough evidence that you should believe or that it's reasonable for you to believe, God isn't required to give more evidence than what he knows would be sufficient to believe just because you'd like to see more evidence. I would like to see more evidence, but he's not required to do that. Okay. And it could be that if he were to give us a flashing neon sign in the heavens and every night people would see that, and people did come to believe, it could be that people, there's a lot of atheists that say if they came to believe that God exists, they wouldn't worship him. Well, it could be that people don't like.
Sure, that could happen. There could be a flashing neon sign, um, and people still wouldn't worship. People still wouldn't do that. But um, if that does happen, I give you permission to. to say "told you so," but we all know that that's not going to happen. I asked a Christian friend of mine the other day, um, "Let's pray to God right now and um, let's see a miracle." Well, it doesn't happen that way. Okay, well, I don't think words or these little philosophy games are going to convince me. Um, so I don't know what to do. You know what I mean? I don't know what to say. Like, I don't know.
The oppressive presence of God, constantly reminding them of his existence and his doctrines, right? So there's a lot to say about this, so you can choose among that variety.
Number three is emotional. If I'm a Christian, I know for a fact there are people that I love that won't make
I
it to
can't
heaven.
stand the little thing on the
How can that
bottom.
be heaven? It can't be heaven for me if there are people that I love that aren't there. And if you're going to say to me, oh, well, you'll just forget those people, then that's even worse. That's so bad.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily going to say God just wipes away all memory of those people, but I would need to know to assess this question more. I would need to know what's your understanding of the nature of hell. Okay, if I knew that, then I could understand this better.
Number four is just the time between.
Okay, so it's actually. Okay, so if you're ever having a conversation about hell with a Christian, um, get away from specifics because every Christian believes something different about hell. Same way with heaven, because hell's not talked about much in the Bible, so it's a bit vague. Um, at the most we can say, the most I can say, hell is bad. Hell's not good, hell is bad. And according to Christianity, God doesn't want me to go there. God doesn't want anyone to go to hell, according to Christianity. So what raises huge giant red flags in my mind is look around. Look around at what people believe. People people believe all kinds of different things about God. Okay? Now Christians are going to sit here and tell me, "Well, God doesn't want you to go. God doesn't want you to go to hell." Okay, then why doesn't he reveal himself to these people in a more plain manner so that they can understand the decision that they're making? And the Christian response to that is going to be, well, he did, and Jesus, and all these arguments and evidence. Well, like I said before, when we go back, people are in major disagreement about the evidence. And if your coping mechanism for that is going to be something like, everyone else that disagrees with me has a problem, they have a mental problem, a mental misunderstanding, an emotional understanding, and I'm different in some way, I can see the truth differently than they can. Um, and this is what I mean with philosophy. You could come back and you could say to my argument that I just told you there, well, this could be and this could possibly be, and what you just said is a non sequitur, and it could be that. Um, all I'm saying is you can use philosophy to explain anything away. One of the big things that black pilled me on philosophy is Bertrand Russell's A History of Western Philosophy, in which he said no argument and no argument from philosophy is ever defeated. It's just updated. Once you point out a flaw in a philosophical argument, it will just be updated later. So if I point out so you can see this happening with hell. Most Christians today don't believe in a quote unquote traditional hell. They believe, oh well, in annihilationism or some form of maybe everyone goes to heaven. Because we all kind of recognize that hell is kind of a stupid concept and it's an unjust concept and it doesn't really make sense. So it will just be updated and updated and updated and updated. And for me, in the real world, somebody in the real world, I'm not a philosopher. Um, I'm someone who takes psychology very serious. I think I'm very good at reading people. Um, if I was reading someone, when it comes to the way that Christians talk about hell, this seems like a coping mechanism. This just seems um, ridiculous. And what seems ridiculous is that Um, if hell was so bad, it just seems like God would these arguments for God would not you would not come away from an argument, a debate with an atheist saying, "Oh, well they made good points on both sides." It would be very similar to um, a Nazi debating uh, a liberal. It would you would come out the other side saying, "Wow, the Nazi seems crazy. The Nazi seems to be revising history. The Nazi doesn't have any good arguments at all." It would be, in my opinion, just in my opinion, that's the way it would play out. But hey, that's just my opinion.
When Jesus died and when the Gospels were written. There's so many arguments over when it was written, yada yada yada. At the very least, we can say decades. And to be honest with you, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast this morning. How the hell is someone supposed to remember what Jesus said, what Jesus did, all these things decades later?
Well, however long you think the time is between when the Gospels were written and the life of Jesus, we still have the creedal statement in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 through 7, and then Paul adds himself, I think, in verse 8. And that was written in the early to mid 50s and is thought of by many scholars to go much further back than that because it was already in the form of a creedal statement. Some people say it goes back to within 3 years of the events themselves. I had Gary Habermas on my show, and I think he mentioned people pushing it back even further than that. But wherever you put it, it's no later than the early to mid 50s and is thought by scholars to go back much further than that. So wherever you think the Gospels are, the claims about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus and appearances to many is all right there in 1 Corinthians 15. So even if you don't think you have the Gospels, that's fine.
I think this is a disingenuous point. You just had a guy capturing Christianity. He just converted to Catholicism, largely on what the Gospels have to say. Now, what the Gospels have to say important or not? And if they're not important, if all that matters is this death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, then let's just are Mormons going to heaven? Mormons believe in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Um, Catholics believe in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. So, I don't. Are we proposing that if you're just like a mere Christian that you're going to go to heaven? I don't think you believe that. I don't think most Christians believe that. I think a lot of Christians you have to believe in that Jesus is God. That you have to believe in the Trinity. You have to make sure that all these doctrines are sound. Um, and you completely ignore my point, I guess, because my point is not to just say that like, uh, oh, there's a breath of time, which that is a point. A larger point is we can see um, it develop through between the creedal statement that you're talking about and John, where Jesus has become this mythological figure that's performing miracles and doing all these things. Um, One of the big things that changed my mind about this is why is it that the guards in the tomb are only mentioned in Matthew? This seems like a huge important point if we're going to try to prove what happened to Jesus, but it's only mentioned in Matthew. And the best explanation, in my opinion, is this is an apologetic. This is something that the community around Matthew's time had come up with um, to explain to Jews that, oh no, we didn't take the body, we didn't steal the body from the tomb, actually, because there were guards there. That seems like a just is such a more plausible explanation than what you're proposing.
And number 5 is just the little contradictions in the Bible. All of these can be explained in some way, right? And when I was a Christian, I had my own little explanation for each one, right? Just because one gospel mentions one colt and the other one just mentions one donkey and then one mentions two, that's not really actually a contradiction. But after a while, these pile up in my brain, and I start to think, would an all-knowing, all-powerful, perfect God Would it be this hard to reconcile all of this?
Okay, so you found things that seemed like contradictions, and then you read up on them. You found, oh, this is not necessarily a contradiction. You said, well, you have a whole bunch of those, and each one's not necessarily a contradiction. But when you have so many, it creates like, I'm taking you to mean this cumulative case where, no, now this does kind of create a situation where I'm now compelled, or I'm less likely to believe because there's so many of these things. But this falls prey to what's called the leaky buckets objection. And that is to say, if you have one bucket that's got a small hole in it, and you say, okay, well, this bucket, I get that this bucket looks impressive when I first put water in it, but that it's got a leak and it doesn't hold water, much like the claim that there are these Bible contradictions in a particular place. But then you found out, it's got a leak in it, meaning it's not really a contradiction. So it doesn't really hold water, what I thought was a contradiction. But now there are so many other buckets, and yes, there's a hole in the bottom of each of these buckets, but there's so many leaky buckets that now putting them all together, they hold water. Well, no, they're still all leaky buckets. You say, well, no, you could put the buckets all together and turn them where the holes don't. I don't even know what that means if someone were to bring that objection. The fact that doesn't work with this analogy, all right? There's a hole in each of these buckets. They're leaky buckets, but maybe if I have a whole bunch of leaky buckets, now they hold water. No, if they're leaky buckets, if these contradictions can be explained such that they're not contradictions, then you have a leaky bucket, and having a bunch of leaky buckets doesn't hold any more water than if you have one leaky bucket, ultimately. So I think that's important to mention.
When it comes down to it,
So I just want to point out the Christians overused philosophy. They use philosophy to a point to where it becomes impractical, in my opinion. So my point in this video is to say, okay, let's imagine that you had a girlfriend, okay? And let's say one night, she was supposed to text you at 9, but she didn't text you till midnight. Oh, well, I fell asleep. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, you probably might have fallen asleep. That's one explanation. That's the one leaky bucket. Okay, the next night, she keeps hiding her phone from me whenever I'm around her. Oh well, I'm just like nervous. My last boyfriend he was like overbearing and Oh, okay, that makes sense. Let's say like I go to the I go to the bar and I see her like like rubbing up against a guy. Oh well, that's actually a friend of mine, and I'm just like kind of the. You see what I'm going? Yeah, there's an explanation for each and every one. We can explain each and every one of these, but you start piling these up, and you go, would a loyal girlfriend do all these things, or is it more likely that she's not a loyal girlfriend? In the same way with the Bible, we can explain every contradiction. I can sit here and explain every contradiction. I can do it. But what's the difference between a Christian and a Muslim? Because a Muslim's going to say the same thing. I could pull up a video right now. I can visualize it in my mind. I made a video about it on TikTok. Every contradiction in the Quran is out of context. Christian's going to say the same thing. So what's the difference? There's no difference.
there are some solid arguments for the existence of God. I just think some form of atheism or some form of deism have much better explanatory power for the reality that we perceive today.
Well, my friend who's on staff here at Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary, Andrew Armstrong, watched this video. I said, watch this, tell me what you think, because I like this guy. I think he's a friendly guy. And after he watched it, he said some of the things that I've said here. But in the end, he said, well, what I'd tell this guy is to keep going, keep studying this stuff. Not in a condescending way. He means it like, hey, if you're saying you think there's some solid arguments on both sides, well, don't give up this quick. Keep looking at it, because you may well become convinced that one of these theistic arguments neutralizes at least the intellectual force of the evidential argument from evil. You might come to think similar things about each of these things you brought up, and maybe you'll become a Christian. But I'd love to hear from you if that's the case.
Okay, so I'm 31 now. I became a Christian when I was 16, and I was an atheist by the time I was about 18. And I've studied the Bible and philosophy and all these things ever since. So we're talking what, like 14 years, 15 years at this point. I've been studying this. Um, Here are red flags, okay, for me that cause me to. And these aren't like the greatest philosophical understanding of the thing, and they're not going to put me in a book anywhere or anything. This is just how I perceive reality. This is how I go through life, and it's served me pretty well so far. To this day, I've never had a conversation with a Christian in person who knows as much about the Bible as I do. Okay, that's a red flag for me because what that says to me is I know more than you and I don't believe it. Why is that? Why is it that you haven't even read the thing and you believe it, and I've read it 10, 15, 20 times and I don't believe it? Why is it that I can argue for it better than you can? Why is it that whenever I'm having a conversation with a Christian in real life, I have to give them the answers? Um, that's a huge red flag for me. That shows me that Christians, for the most part, don't believe on solid evidence. And if people don't believe on solid evidence, then that raises in my mind another objection for God, and that is um, these people just got lucky. If these people were born in the Middle East, they would just believe in the God of wherever they're at because they don't have any they're not using critical thinking. Do you understand what I mean? They just got lucky. And if what you're saying is true, God is real. God is real, and I've come to this conclusion through quote unquote critical thinking, and they literally just believe it, then in my mind that makes kind of an unjust situation where I'm really taking it seriously. I'm really reading. I'm really putting forth the effort, and this guy believes in God because who knows why? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have had this conversation with Christians. Why is it that you believe? And they don't even really have an answer. Um, and they don't know. They don't know when Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were written. Um, they don't. They don't know anything. Um, so that's kind of this is my the more and more I talk to Christians, the more and more I realize that they never even question what they believe. So that's a huge red flag for me. Um, and it's a red flag because it points to like an unjust system here. You understand what I mean? I actually care about it. I actually want to know the truth. You just want to believe what? And I'm not saying you. I'm just talking about these Christians that I've had conversations with. They just believe it because they were born into it. And if they were born somewhere else, they would believe something totally different because they don't actually care to get down into the nitty gritty details. How many Christians do you know um, even know an argument for God? If I said Kalam cosmological argument, most Christians don't even know what that is. A lot of Christians online know what it is. Most Christians in real life have never heard of it. And that leads me to believe that they don't really care. And if they don't really care, I mean, I guess you could sit here and Christian could say to me technically, well, those aren't real Christians. Well, then that raises another objection in my mind, and that's like, okay, well, in this case, like this God that you're talking about, I mean, what percentage of Christians are going to heaven? Like 5%? What a failure of a God, right? This God is such a failure. Um, and the Christian response to that is going to be like, no, 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 God is not a failure. We're the failure. But for me, it's like this is like the leadership type thing. We're always gonna, in any other situation, we're gonna blame the leader for this type of failure. But when it comes to religious context, no, 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 no. See how we're always defending. We're always getting to that point where we're defending God. We're not. It's not plainly obvious. It's not clear. We're always in a defensive posture, and for me, it makes absolutely no sense. But yeah. Hopefully, thanks Braxton for responding to my video. Um, hopefully you get something out of my mind. I don't think I'm a typical atheist. Um, just me. So, have a good one, guys.